Under the blazing studio lights of Jimmy Kimmel Live, Melania Trump stepped onto the stage like a silent predator and proceeded to dismantle the smug, late-night comedy king in front of millions, turning his own jokes, his own clips, and his own arrogant words against him with ice-cold precision, while the audience watched their favorite liberal mouthpiece get publicly humiliated and exposed as nothing more than a one-sided narrative peddler pretending to be an entertainer. The studio lights burned bright and hot. The audience had filed in expecting the usual Jimmy Kimmel Live experience. People were already settled in their seats, chatting and sipping drinks, ready for a fun, light night. No one was braced for anything heavy. This was supposed to be entertainment, not a battlefield. Then, Melania Trump walked out. She moved with the calm, steady confidence she's known for. No big wave, no flashy smile, just a quiet poise that made the whole room pay attention anyway. The applause came polite and respectful, but not loud. It wasn't the roar. She took her seat across from Jimmy, crossed her legs smoothly, and gave a small nod to the crowd. Jimmy flashed that familiar, warm grin, the one he's used on 1,000 guests. "Melania, great to have you here tonight," he said, leaning forward like an old friend. "How's life treating you these days? I know things have been pretty busy with the family and everything." Melania smiled lightly and answered with ease. She talked about simple things, how the kids were doing, adjusting to new routines, a few light comments about life in the spotlight. Her voice stayed soft and controlled. The audience laughed in the right places and started to relax. A few people even leaned back in their seats, thinking this was going to be just another smooth interview. Jimmy kept it light. "And how's married life with one of the most talked-about men in the world? Any big family dinners lately?" He chuckled, clearly expecting another easy, charming answer. That's when it shifted. Melania paused for just a second. Not long, but long enough that people noticed. She tilted her head slightly, her expression still calm, but her eyes sharpened. The easy smile faded just a touch. "Jimmy," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I appreciate the kind questions, but let's talk about something real for a moment. Your show reaches millions of people every night. When late-night comedy keeps repeating the same narratives night after night, it stops being just jokes. It starts shaping what people accept as truth." The words landed like a quiet bomb. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Some people shifted in their seats. A few whispered to the person next to them. The relaxed vibe from 30 seconds earlier vanished. Jimmy let out a quick laugh, the kind he always uses to smooth things over, but his eyes betrayed him. They widened just a fraction, a flash of real surprise. He tried to play it cool. "Well, we do like to have fun here, Melania. That's kind of the point." Jimmy kept smiling, trying to steer things back to safe ground. "Hey, come on. We're just a late-night show having some fun. We poke at everybody. That's what comedy does." Melania didn't laugh. She stayed perfectly calm, her posture straight, her voice even and clear. "But that's exactly the problem, Jimmy. There's a blurry line between being an entertainer and acting like a truth-teller. When you repeat the same jokes every night, they stop feeling like jokes. They become the story people start believing. Millions watch you. They laugh, but they also absorb." The studio grew quieter. A few audience members nodded slowly. Others sat frozen, suddenly very focused on the stage. Jimmy let out his signature chuckle and leaned back in his chair, trying to brush it off with humor. "Well, if we're that powerful, maybe I should run for office," he said, flashing a grin at the crowd, hoping for laughs. Only a few people chuckled nervously. Most stayed silent. Melania didn't miss a beat. She looked straight at him, still calm, but her words cut sharper. "Reflection without responsibility becomes distortion. That's what we're seeing." Jimmy's smile tightened. He shifted in his seat, clearly recalibrating. Before he could jump in again, Melania continued, her tone still measured but direct. "Just last month, you ran that extended bit about my husband's policies. the one where you kept calling it chaos for clicks. It got millions of views, trended everywhere, and triggered real backlash. Families wrote in saying it made them scared for no reason. That wasn't just comedy anymore. It was shaping fear. The audience went completely silent. No murmurs, no coughs, just heavy, focused quiet. A few people in the front rows nodded visibly. One woman in a red sweater folded her arms and leaned forward, clearly agreeing. The shift in the room was unmistakable. The light, fun energy from the beginning of the show had evaporated. Jimmy's grin faded. He rubbed his hands together once, then leaned forward again, his voice a little tighter now, a little less playful. "Okay, let's talk about that segment specifically if you want." Then Jimmy sat up straighter in his chair, forcing that familiar late-night host smile back onto his face. "Look, Melania, comedy has always been exaggeration. We're not CNN. We're not the nightly news. Our audience is smart enough to know the difference between a joke and real reporting. They laugh, they move on. It's not that deep." Melania listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap, posture perfect. She didn't look angry. She looked focused. "Influence isn't about what you call it, Jimmy. Your show reaches over 3 million people every single night. That's more than most news programs. When you keep hitting the same stories, the same angles, night after night, it doesn't just entertain. It shapes how millions of Americans see the world. Media like yours has real power, and with that power comes responsibility." The studio felt heavier now. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Jimmy tried to laugh it off again. "Responsibility? I thought I was just the guy who makes fun of politicians so people can unwind after a long day." But Melania didn't smile back. "And that's the real issue, consistency. You criticize one side hard and often, but the other side gets soft treatment or complete silence. It's not balanced comedy anymore. It's selective. Let me show everyone exactly what I mean." She turned her head slightly toward the control booth, calm as ever. "Can we play the short montage I sent over earlier?" The big screen behind them flickered to life. The lights in the studio dimmed just a touch. For the next 2 minutes, Jimmy's own clips played one after another in quick, sharp cuts. Jimmy mocking Trump's rallies with dramatic music. Jimmy joking about conservative policies while shaking his head in fake disbelief. Jimmy laughing with guests who piled on the same narrative. The pattern was impossible to miss, relentless, one-sided, repeated for months. The audience reaction started small, but grew fast. Low murmurs at first, then louder whispers. A few gasps broke out when a particularly harsh clip played. An older man in the third row shook his head slowly. A woman in a blue jacket leaned over to her friend and said, "She's not wrong." The murmurs turned into open chatter. Someone clapped once, then another joined. The energy in the room had completely flipped. Jimmy's face changed. The easy smile disappeared. He rubbed his palms together and leaned forward, trying to pivot fast. "We challenge public figures, Melania. That's literally our job. Late-night comedy has always held power accountable. We push back on whoever's in the spotlight. That's how it works." Melania looked him straight in the eyes, her voice steady and clear. "But what about consistency, Jimmy? Why does one side get challenged every single week while the other gets a free pass? Is that still comedy? Or is it something else?" The question landed hard. The studio went dead quiet for a second, then exploded with reaction. More people were nodding now, clearly on her side. A solid round of applause broke out from the middle and back rows. Several audience members leaned forward in their seats, eyes locked on the stage. The tension jumped to a new level. You could feel the shift happening in real time. Jimmy's jaw tightened. His usual quick humor was gone. He looked like a man who suddenly realized the ground under him was moving. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried to speak again, but the words came slower this time. Then Jimmy leaned forward, both hands planted firmly on his desk as he tried to wrestle the conversation back under his control. "Melania, let's be real here. Public figures invite scrutiny. That's the deal when you step into the arena. You're in the spotlight, so people get to joke about you. And intent matters. We're not out here trying to destroy lives. We're just doing comedy. We're reflecting what's happening, exaggerating for laughs. That's all. Melania listened without interrupting, her face calm and composed. She waited until he finished, then slowly shook her head. Intent matters, Jimmy. I agree with that. But impact matters far more. Let me give you a very recent example that your audience probably remembers. She leaned forward slightly, her voice still steady, but carrying real weight. Just 2 weeks ago, you ran that long segment where you mocked my husband's border policies. You kept repeating the line, "Chaos is the brand," and played it over dramatic music. That clip went viral instantly, millions of views trending everywhere. Within days, our family started receiving new death threats at home. Not online trolls, real threats, letters, calls, people showing up near our property. The studio grew deathly quiet. Melania continued, her eyes never leaving Jimmy's. And it doesn't stop with my husband. Those same narratives follow our children. My son came home from school last month asking me why so many kids were saying his father is a bad person who wants to hurt people. He heard it from classmates who watched your show and others like it. That's not abstract comedy anymore, Jimmy. That's our real, everyday life. That's the impact of the stories you help shape night after night. Her words landed heavily across the entire room. Suddenly, a woman in the 4th row shot to her feet, her face red with emotion. Exactly, she shouted at the top of her voice. That's exactly what's happening. She started clapping loudly and passionately. Within seconds, more people joined in, strong applause rolling from the middle and back sections. But the room was clearly divided. Another group groaned and shook their heads. Some booed lightly. Whispers turned into arguments between seats. The studio had split right down the middle. Jimmy froze. He sat there silent for a long, uncomfortable pause. 5, 6, 7 full seconds that felt like forever on live television. His usual quick wit didn't save him this time. When he finally spoke, his voice came out a little higher, a little shakier than normal as he tried to force a laugh. Wow! I guess we really touched a nerve tonight, huh? He gave a weak chuckle and glanced at the crowd, hoping the humor would land. That's why we do live TV, right? Anything can happen. The joke died instantly. Almost no one laughed. The applause for Melania's words grew even louder. More audience members were nodding and leaning toward her side of the stage. A few people in the front row were visibly emotional. The tension in the studio had climbed to a breaking point. Jimmy's shoulders were tight. His smile looked strained. He seemed genuinely rattled. Jimmy's face hardened. He wasn't smiling anymore. He leaned all the way forward, his voice sharper and faster now. You know what, Melania? This is getting ridiculous. We make jokes. That's our job. If every single joke has to be run through a sensitivity filter, then comedy is dead. Public figures get roasted. That's the price of power. Maybe instead of coming after my show, take a look at how your own side talks about people. He tried to force a laugh, throwing in a quick jab. Or are we only allowed to punch up now? Is that the new rule? The attempt at humor landed flat. Almost no one laughed. A few awkward chuckles died quickly in the back rows. Melania stayed completely calm, but her words grew sharper and more direct. You call it jokes, Jimmy. But when those jokes are repeated for years, they become something else. They become weapons. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The studio was hanging on every word. Then came the moment everyone would remember. Intent does not erase impact, Melania said clearly, her eyes locked on his. You said it yourself on this show 6 months ago. Words have power, and comedians have a duty to use them wisely. Your exact words. Yet here we are. The same show pushing the same one-sided pattern week after week. You called my husband dangerous, unstable, a threat to democracy, over and over. Those aren't jokes anymore. Those are narratives that real people act on. She paused just long enough for the quote to sink in, then hit him directly. You said those words on air, Jimmy. So tell me, do you still believe comedians have a duty to use their power wisely? Or was that just another line that sounds good in the moment? The question hit like a hammer. Jimmy opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he looked truly cornered. The breaking point exploded. Jimmy, clearly rattled, snapped back defensively. Look, if your family is getting threats, maybe that says more about the kind of people who support you than it does about my comedy. The words barely left his mouth before the studio erupted. Gasps exploded across the audience. Then came the roar. Loud, sustained applause from more than half the room, mixed with shocked murmurs and even a few boos. People were standing up now. The woman who had shouted, "Exactly!" earlier, was on her feet again, clapping hard. Others joined her. The energy was raw and electric. The split in the crowd was total. Melania didn't raise her voice once. She simply sat there, composed, letting the moment breathe. Her silence was louder than any shout. She controlled the entire rhythm of the exchange now, and everyone could feel it. The audience was completely locked in, leaning forward, phones forgotten, fully invested in what was happening on that stage. Jimmy's face had gone tight. His attempt to flip the script had backfired badly, and the whole room knew it. The tension had reached its absolute peak. This wasn't television anymore. This was a live, unfiltered reckoning. Jimmy sat back slightly, trying to steady himself. The roar in the studio was still echoing as he raised his hands in a small gesture, attempting to calm the room. Melania looked at him directly, her voice remaining calm but firm. Conversations only matter when they lead to accountability, Jimmy. Not just clever comebacks or good ratings, real accountability. When someone with your reach admits the impact their words have, that's when it actually means something. Jimmy exhaled slowly. For a few seconds, he didn't speak. Then he gave a small nod. That's a fair point, Melania. I'll give you that. We all have a responsibility to think about what we put out there. His tone stayed professional, polished, the veteran host showing through. He tried to smile again, but it didn't reach his eyes. This has been a very honest conversation tonight. Melania didn't let the moment soften. She leaned forward just a little, delivering her final words with quiet strength. The truth is simple. When late-night shows repeatedly distort reality under the cover of jokes, they don't just entertain. They divide. They don't reflect truth anymore. They create their own version of it. And once that distortion spreads, it's very hard to pull back. America deserves better than that. We all do. The studio erupted. This time, the applause was louder and more unified than anything that had come before. Not polite clapping, but real, sustained applause that rolled through every section of the audience. People stood up in waves, cheers mixed with the sound of hands clapping hard. Even some who had been defensive earlier seemed moved by the directness of her final message. The energy felt different now, heavier, more serious, like the room had witnessed something important. Melania gave a small, graceful nod to the audience, then turned back to Jimmy. She didn't smile triumphantly. She simply stood up with the same calm poise she had walked in with. Jimmy stood as well, keeping his professional face on. Melania Trump, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight and for that very candid conversation. He clapped along with the audience as she walked off the stage, waving politely to the crowd. But the second she disappeared behind the curtain, the atmosphere in the studio didn't reset to normal. There was a lingering silence for several long seconds. People sat in their seats, still processing what they had just seen. No one jumped straight back into casual chatter. Phones started lighting up immediately as people texted and posted. Within minutes, social media was exploding. Clips of the exchange were already going viral. The montage, the woman shouting, "Exactly." Melania's calm delivery of intent does not erase impact, and that final powerful line about truth versus distortion. Jimmy tried to wrap the segment smoothly, cracking a light joke to transition to the next guest, but the laughter felt forced. The control of the night had clearly shifted. What started as a standard late-night appearance had become a defining moment. No dramatic hugs or feel-good endings, just sharp clarity that hung in the air long after the lights dimmed. The audience kept talking about it even as the show moved on. Something real had happened under those bright studio lights, and everyone could feel the lasting echo. Melania hadn't raised her voice once, yet she had changed the entire rhythm of the room. The reckoning was complete.